Cramer. Randy, how you doing?
I'm good. How you doing?
Excellent,
Very well,
excellent.
very well.
And, we have a few things to talk about today that we have not covered in either interviews that we've done with you,
hmm
either in our radio show or the new format.
hmm
And I'd just like to get right into it. Now, I was watching some very interesting footage of a lecture that you had given not too long ago, where you talked a good deal about the soul, the human soul, or I guess the galactic soul. I don't know if I think all same. We talk about as well. The fact that the soul is really contained within a type of quantum fluid. And when you
Right.
first arrived on your assignments abroad, shall we say, you arrived with a certain amount of cloned material or bodies, and you did go into it a little bit where you said that if injuries had been traumatic enough and a complete clone is needed, then somehow that quantum fluid can be extracted from the
Yep.
original human form and somehow
Yep.
injected or transferred into the new
Yep.
cloned body. Could you tell us a little bit about
Yeah.
that?
Not much,
Okay.
to be honest, unfortunately, because it's a technology to which there's a lot of secrecy around.
Hmm.
And when you're going through the process, you're not conscious. It's like being wheeled into an operating room, and the procedure and all this, and everybody in your wheel. I mean, there's very very little conscious memory to sort of pump now because you are having the medical experience of your soul being moved from one place to another. You can access higher memory to sort of try and understand the experience, which I've attempted to do. And all I can really say is that it doesn't give me much more enlightenment other than what I've heard other people say, which is your soul, however we want to define this, other than to say that there is like this strain of science that has been developed not just because we say so or because our scientists are so smart, but because enough extraterrestrials said again and again, no, this is a thing. This is a whole like area of science that you need to understand is like having measurable traits and quantifiable traits and relationship traits between forces and so forth. Like it's science, like all your other things you got to understand that way. So because extraterrestrials came, in these conversations, made it quite clear that this was scientific, factual data that we needed to process and understand. That's why it's science, not because we say so, but because everybody in the universe says so. But it's a quantum fluid dynamic, which means on some really, 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 really micro subatomic level of some of the tiniest particles that are known, of which can make up and hold these fluids, are essentially extracted with a pumping mechanism. A pumping mechanism that has the ability to pump this, can contain this fluid. Like what special materials and or field apparatus you need for that, I'm only guess because I'm not an engineer or a scientist of that, but I'm assuming there's some special materials and
Hmm.
field energetics that you have to do to be able to move that quantum fluid energetic to pump it from one source to another. People, mystics and metaphysics have talked about access points like behind at the top of the neck and sort of at the base of the spine. Those seem to also be access points where you're drawn in and pumped back out. So there seems to be some scientific validity to that as well, not just a metaphysical notion. But beyond that, I can't be too specific because I don't know much more of the science other than they are able to pump it out. I use the sort of giant sucking syringe motion, but I don't think it works like that. There's
Hmm.
a pump, that's working, boom, 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 drawing it out over time into a container, and they are able to hold it in this container and transport that container, put that container on a shelf somewhere, store that container, put it on a ship it somewhere else. I mean, which just brings into a whole other set of questions, really, on what that means or the ramifications of what that could mean if you can just extract something, put it in a jar effectively, and take it somewhere, put it. We we like to we behave with some rules to that. We like to think that other people have taught us to behave with some rules about that. But does that mean that everyone who has the technology uses or obeys the rules? No. And so are you subjecting yourself to some karmic danger by not obeying the rules? Yeah. And can that all blow back in our faces and hurt us all? Yeah. But I can't answer for like everybody's use of that technology. So all I can say is that, yeah, they're able to draw it out and put it back in. And if it's a clone of you, you will adapt and assimilate very quickly because as far as you're concerned, everything's the same. Even though it's, a copy, it's the same. So as far as your feet, was it this eyebrow? It was that side.
Mm-hmm.
Now it's this side. Or wait, I had to do it over on this side. Now it's on this side. I was something pain. I would look in the mirror and sometimes spend an hour just like looking at my freaking face, trying to figure out what was slightly different, but almost completely the same. But as far as how you feel on the rest of your body, it's just it's insignificant. But there's also the ability to put beings into other bodies, extraterrestrial bodies, to put extraterrestrial souls into human bodies. So I mean, there isn't. At that point, you're not just talking about somebody who's like possessing someone, or even like someone who has a psionic consciousness, who's like trying to walk in or cohabitate with someone. You're talking about literally pumping someone's soul out of their body, putting it in a container, and then taking someone else's soul from another container and pumping it back in, and then that soul is now in that body as if it were its own, but not. And we probably have some people walking around with extraterrestrial souls inside their bodies. That's something to consider when we think about that. I mean, sometimes people just want to say that they're just shape-shifting. Are they? Or that they're being mind controlled? Are they? Maybe in some cases they just took a soul, extracted it, and pumped another one in.
Well,
just one. It becomes one of the thing on the list of possibilities. When you're wondering like, how is someone not themselves? Just becomes one more thing on the list of possibilities.
Yeah. Do you think, Randy, that that all souls are really, the same, bit of creative force, whether it's an alien body, whether it's a human body? I mean, certainly in the area of past life regression or interlife regression, which, as you know, I work in as a hypnotherapist, it's very common for people to travel to the so-called afterlife and have encounters with councils, full of beings of wide varieties. It seems as if souls are really maybe all the same. What do you think about that?
Well, according to the scientists, according to the intergalactic and our own scientists, they're actually more divided up into what we consider wells. So the primary well of souls that participates in reincarnation on planet Earth and surrounding environments, let's say, what we would call. And so that well is managed by other interdimensional beings or higher beings who help manage that well on another level. So as people are dying and be born, there's a whole process of, well, how did that go? No, not very well this time. Okay, let's try for another plan and see if we can do it better. I mean, there's just that there is an organizational level there. People have experienced it, but as we seem to understand it, the way in which that is, and I know people don't believe me sometimes when I say this, the way in which the metaphysical supernatural universe is managed by the bureaucracy of it is into compartments, and it's not just one big thing. It is one big thing, but it's one big thing that's all compartmentalized. Now you can transfer from well to well, right? So it's not you're locked into a well necessarily. There are relationships with that well. There are the field, people talk about the field that's keep from being reborn or reincarnated or escaping. No, it's a net that if you're not smart enough, you might not be able to get around, but it's not impenetrable. So, there are still ways to come in and out of the well and come in and out through a net, but ways to also confuse and or trap and or at least confuse for a period of time or trap for a period of time souls within a matrix of some kind. Again, it's science. There's different rules that can apply that are both operationally good and people trying to fuck with it, because there's
Mm-hmm.
always some asshole somewhere trying to fuck with something.
Yeah.
I hate to just say it, but corrupted light just makes assholes everywhere trying to fuck with shit.
Yeah.
I don't know how else to say it.
Yeah. Yeah. It's true. It's so
Yeah.
human nature is really, galactic nature. I mean, it's we're not alone in the fact that we have a wide range of people with various agendas, various platforms, hopefully moving towards some kind of enlightenment. One hopes. When you were.
No. In fact, that is as much as above, so below as you could possibly think of it. It is just as bureaucratic sometimes, just as backlogged sometimes, just as confusing sometimes, and just as much greedy bastards and assholes trying to fuck with shit because, they're dicks. I don't know what else to say
Yeah.
about, what corrupted light turns people into. It just turns them into greedy dicks and they just fuck with shit.
Yeah.
So instead of having people running things smoothly so we can all sort of be happy and healthy and functional, people got to come in and monkey wrench it. And that just means that there's more work to be done. So then there has to be navigation, policing, and people who are trying to sort that process out. And then that's how you get into whole organizational metaphysical structures, to deal with that and to fight and to it gets so complicated. That's how you have this super complicated metaphysical supernatural network that interacts with the other dimensional sort of birthing realms that we're birthed into and that we live into, sort of experience life and different vibrational realities before we go back to sort of metaphysical mathematical energetics, because different realities are in some cases are really, really, really different. But it seems to be contained in wells. Sorry to come back to the question. And those wells can be very, very large. So it's not just like the Earth well. It's a well that extends to maybe this corner of the galaxy, and maybe you might spend more time in this corner of the well and not this corner of the well. I mean, the wells are big, but it's basically sort of what we think of as bureaucratically confined to wells, that there's free moving borders based on need and function. You're able to make a free will choice and go, I just want to go to the other end of the universe this time. And guides will be all right, and you have the option to just head off to some other end of the universe, to some other well, and go, I'm going to try here now. And all right, I mean, that may or may not be a good choice for your soul to do that in the long run, but it's your choice. If you want to just leave everything behind here and go start over somewhere else, that is an option. Might not be a good option. I'm not advising anybody to do it necessarily, but if you really feel like it ain't working for you here, you could just go somewhere else and try it there too. You can move, but it takes some consciousness to do that when you're there. And most of us most of us really, when we're in our light state, are persistent. We want to keep trying and getting right that we have able to get right.
Indeed.
Right.
And of
We're
course
actually
I would
than we do when we're
assume.
alive.
Oh, excuse me, Randy. I didn't mean to interrupt you. I was just going to
Oh
say.
no, that was the end of my sentence.
Okay.
That was the end of my sentence, so we're cool.
Good. And when I first was getting my head around this quantum fluid idea, one of our trusty research assistants, actually my husband, believe it or not, discovered that this idea of the quantum fluid is really nothing new. And apparently there's a Vedic tradition, and there's someone named Nisargadatta Maharaj who talked extensively about the appearance of the I am, and that stepping into the body occurs in some way through the third eye or third ventricle with cerebral fluid, which is made up of water, I suppose, proteins, neurotransmitters, and this magic formula, if you want to call it the soul or the establishment of the I am, continues to move through the pineal gland, and maybe DNT is involved, and somehow the presence of the soul is established. So what you're talking about in terms of cutting edge, maybe futuristic science is definitely referenced in the most ancient Vedic texts, that a text that there is in fact a separate substance which is palpable and fluid and establishes that identity.
Well, and I believe there has been some establishment of the loss of weight at death, and someone came up with a figure that it's about 19 grams. So at the actual time of death, that the body loses 19 grams. And
Right.
so if you're losing which isn't a lot, 19 grams really isn't a lot when you're considering, like, the mass of your entire body. But if you just take a breath and it disappears, well, what's that and where does that go? So there's some suggestion that that fluid has a actual weight to it for being in its massive size, actually, that it is, to be actually 19 grams of some kind of actual dimensional mass makes sense.
Yeah.
Maybe that's not the actual number, maybe, because instrumentation and all, but there's to be a measurable loss of
Yes.
weight. At the moment of your last breath and your last heartbeat, where's that?
That's true. That's true.
I just wanted to, we have so many questions, it's like the ongoing show here, but I just wanted to this quantum, speaking about immortality.
Well, in the sense that the quantum fluid itself doesn't age.
Mm-hmm.
Quantum fluid itself has an immortal quality to it, but it has a quality and, like, I dare want to say utterly destroyed, but there are circumstances where it can be utterly destroyed.
Really?
Wow.
Really?
Rare, complicated circumstances they're not. There's one circumstance that I've been told of which the deployment of it, that it in which I had a inside of it, so I star in the middle of it. It's a Dyson sphere, I don't know. So that's a Dyson sphere. If you know what a Dyson sphere is,
Yes.
It's built around a star. And
Yeah.
the star is the power center in the middle of it. Well, this particular chip design also has a gun, a beam weapon, out the front of it that's powered by that star that concentrates and focuses all that energy into a concentrated beam that's still probably the width of, like, Jupiter.
Mm-hmm.
When I say a concentrated beam, here's the sun, here's Jupiter, it concentrates this beam, like not just like a magnifying glass, like a series of magnifying glasses, but a series of things that swirl and amplify and do this focus, all this solar energy into this beam that fires off into space and can evaporate entire star systems and solar systems, and it was devised for things that are of corrupted light of a size and scope of which are more terrifying to even speak or think of, but these weapons were used to destroy them. And one of the effects that they found out that the intensity of this beam actually vaporized most soul matter, and it was often found floating about in bits and pieces. So it's the only thing that they've ever seen, like, taking the power of sun and concentrating it, 1 billion times into a beam, is the one thing that could just like rip a soul into shreds. But nothing else seems to be able to, like, absolutely, utterly destroy them. But you can sure poke holes in them all day long.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
You can poke them all day long, and that's destructive enough, as
Yeah.
it turns out. But
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you for that.
Thank you, Randy.
yeah,
Um, Randy, are there, when talking about the secret parallel space programs, and I suppose we'll talk about Earth, Terra and the stuff that we're doing here with the world governments, are there three that operate independently, or are there more? How many of these sort of military operations are coexisting and interacting with each other?
yeah, that's the problem, right? Trying to answer that. So let me answer it this way. You go back to the beginning of compartmentalization, which is we need to spread out these pieces and these bits of information and let different departments work on them. But what that turned into very, very quickly was each and every department deciding, well, we need all of these pieces put together so we know what's going on and we can build our own ships and we can, be self-determined. And so as all of this group started to become self-determined and spy, I mean, most of the spying we were doing during the Cold War was on ourselves.
Mm.
I mean, to be honest with you, most of the spying we were doing on the Cold War was different agencies spying on different agencies, trying to get their UFO ET technology for themselves. I mean, we had the most information and technology. So we were spying on ourselves, trying to get the information from ourselves more than we were trying to get anything from anybody else. Yeah, put that in your noggin and kind of put around a little. Because we were operating with the Russians and spying on each other, and I mean, it was all just to get the ET and the crashed air spaceship information technology. So as each department got enough information to build a ship, well, then you got to train a few pilots, and then you got to build some more ships, and then before you know it, you've got an Air Corps or a Space Corps developing, that starts with 2 dozen guys, right, and 5 ships, and you build from there. And so everybody has built from there. If they had the ability to, they did. So the Army has a covert program, the Marine has a covert program, the Air Force has a covert program. The Navy's got a covert. Well, the Navy's covert program is more overt than anybody else's program, because you can look up Naval Space Command, and they have an office and look up he's on the minimal amount of information on the internet about Naval Space Command, but they're stuck. What? Oh, no. We just launching a few rockets, a few satellites. No, we're not up to anything. I mean, they're still pretending they're this very, very tiny organization, but they're self-admitted. You can look them up. I mean, you can look up. People still, who should know stuff. We're not even talking about covert. And I say, no, look up, like Google Naval Space Command. There's an office in Washington, D.C. There's a, what this last year, the year before, I can't remember because time bleeds into my brain so much, but it wasn't too long ago they got a new head of Naval Space Command, and they put this new guy in charge, and there was a little article about it on their website, and it's this very tucked in the back kind of thing, and it's like, no, we have this really tiny little office and it's nothing, but there's a Naval Space Command. They admit it. They got their little emblem and everything. I mean, there's an office, a command answer, right? They've admitted that much. Air Force admits they have a space command, but they say, no, we just launch rockets, but we don't tell you what we're doing. Mm-hmm. And then, we launch unmanned probes, but then we don't tell you what we're doing. And then, we launch 30, launches a month, but we're not up to anything. And I mean, so, and so Air Force Space Command is just a cover for Deep Space Command, for the Air Force, which is this whole other thing. So they're not telling you anything about what they're launching up in space, but they're also not telling you anything about their deeper program. So the question isn't who makes up the program. The question is who doesn't make up the program. Like if someone has had the ability to, develop a program, then they've developed a program. And we also know over time that not everybody's program kept going. There are programs that failed. There are programs that programs were annihilated off the map by competitors. Okay, we don't talk about that necessarily, but sometimes there may have been in the development of covert space programs, somebody developed a space program that someone said no, and just said, "Nah, gonna stomp on that right now before that goes anywhere," and you're done. Or they made a mistake and decided on some sort of new engine design that turned into some kind of catastrophic wormhole that sucked them across the universe, and they're gone. That doesn't go in the history books, but that happened. So so there's all kinds of these little stories, that just happened in the process. So some of these programs didn't make it. And so over time, they started cooperating more and, the programs through the UN and so forth to kind of get cohesion among different programs to create other that became separate programs that were drawing material and personnel from these lower tier programs. And so you just kind of have this brain drain, technician drain, talent drain up this chain, into these more and more covert programs. And so we do have some of the best and brightest there, but that also means that we've had some of the best and brightest taken from the other tiers, which means we have some of the less best and brightest sometimes now working in these lower tiers. And this is a problem. Yeah. This has become a problem. And I still point out the case that was not too long ago and we're still having this problem for anyone who's not paying attention. We have most of our nuclear arsenal has been deactivated, decommissioned state that they cannot fire. That doesn't mean that every single warhead has been disassembled and taken apart and defused. Okay, this is another problem. All right, is really the process of taking aging old weapons that in some cases have mold growing in the joints. Okay?
Yeah.
Mold growing in the creases of the metal joints and in the screw heads. Okay, that's how old some of these warheads are. They have mold growing on them. They're starting to corrode and decay. And so in some cases they're not able to be fired. They're not able to be launched. That doesn't mean they couldn't be put into the back of a plane and kicked out the back and set off as a dirty bomb. Yeah. Doesn't mean that if the fuses fail, if you understand how a nuclear weapon works, if it doesn't mean if the fuses fail that it could still go off in-house, that it could still go off wherever it's being housed. And so one of the problems that we're having in these expert teams of nuclear engineers that have been going and looking at these fuses that are starting to fail on these weapons, and essentially just trying to buy themselves time because of how much time it takes to take these things apart and grind up the old uranium and plutonium and shit and basically safely do this. There's 5 guys. I mean, it's ridiculous. I mean, I'm not even kidding. There's maybe 5 or 10, 20, a team of 20 guys who this is their job, and that's it. I mean, the way that the money has been, filtered out into command level and so forth. And I mean, there's really 20 guys who are responsible for doing this job and actually hands-on taking a shit apart, because that's you have this tiny team of professional people who are trained and capable of doing it. Not only trained to do it, want to do it, are willing to do it, right? I mean, for the pay and for what in many cases the Air Force right now is looking dead in career. You get into nuclear weapons. It used to be a career. You get into nuclear weapons, it's like a dead end career, so nobody wants to do it. But we've got all these aging bombs that are just sitting ready to pop. So again, it's not so much that they're usable, it's that they just could blow up. I mean, and they could be a problem. Yeah. So there's 5 fuses on a warhead, and when all 5 of those fuses shut off, that's when the weapon becomes volatile. Okay, so in some cases you have fuses that are failing. You got 3 out of 5. You got 2 out of 5. So these engineers sat down and were like, okay, it is our job just to buy us time. We want to replace the fuses. So they sat down with the goal of looking at these fuses, trying to understand how they were built by engineers 3, 4 decades ago, or whatever it was, back in the 60s. I can't even count now. And how to replace them, just how to build new ones and replace them, because they couldn't find any paperwork or anybody alive to tell them about it. They had a top team of engineers. They spent a year on it and $7 million. And at the end of their time trying to figure this out, they said, we need more money and we need more time. We can't figure it out. because, as it turns out, these engineers were smarter than we are, and they knew how to build stuff better than we do, and they made these things smarter and more complicated than we've been able to figure out. We need more time and more money.
Oh boy. Wow.
Happened.
Yeah.
That happened.
Yeah.
So that's the brain drain into these deep space programs. Is then we have programs that still need smart people to fix the problems, like nuclear engineering and atomic weaponry, and we got 20 guys that are trying to sort it out. And oh my goodness, if you look at some of the mishandling issues and things that have been done with the weapons, I mean, it's just, I mean, I know that there was it was not too long ago, a bunch of heads rolled. This all came out and a bunch of heads rolled, and hopefully they've supposedly got a guy who went in and has been cleaning this up. Has he? I don't know. I honestly, I haven't heard enough to tell me that the cleaned up department to tell me it's been cleaned up. But a few years back here, a couple years back, it was this horrible, oh my God, I can't believe what a disaster this is. The top guy got fired. A bunch of people, you can, Google this or whatever, a bunch of officers got reprimanded, and there was a whole bunch of people that lost their jobs because of essentially what was just rampant mismanagement within the nuclear weapons arsenals of the Air Force. So that's just an example, just one example. And so we have that same problem happening where you have people trying to address technological problems that were designed and built by people that were smarter than them.
Oh, wow.
And they honestly are just trying to figure it out, and they can't.
Very disturbing.
Yeah, it's terribly. Wow.
Well, it's what. Let me take this opportunity for a pitch. This is one more reason why we need fundamental public education focusing on math and science and engineering. Because without a fundamental process of public education focusing on teaching kids math, science, and engineering, guess what? We're not going to have those people. But if we had a public education system that said, we want to have a bunch of smart math, science, and engineering people, then we focused on that, then we'd produce them, and we wouldn't have the gaps that we are having right now in technological trained jobs, because we'd have more people with science, math, and engineering backgrounds there. That's my pitch for education.
So true, and more women being drawn into those professions. As you know, and I'm as old as dirt, so when I was in school, it was very unusual for any women to be lured or acknowledged into anything but the liberal arts. So as we begin to utilize everybody
better at that, and I've even seen some of these fascinating and beautiful programs to get girls only science classes. I think we're one of the most brilliant that somebody came up with, because there was a study that was done that just showed that girls in mixed classes won't raise their hand and ask questions when there's boys around, because they're too shy. But you put them, we're talking about teenage girls, adolescent girls, junior high girls, too shy, they don't want to raise their hand in front of the boys. So you just take them into a class, whether it's just us girls with a female teacher, and they absolutely get engaged and want to learn. So the study was done, and they were like, well, let's just have more of these classes. And so they have absolutely seen successful track of girls starting at 11, 12, and 13 years old, starting in science classes and getting career track. And it's there's ways to do it for sure. We've seen examples. So that's just an example of how we can do it right, and that is how we do it more right. So there's ways to do it. It's not even about like, what do we do? How do we do it? It's like, you spend some money on education, and you actually want people to learn how to do stuff, not take tests.
Absolutely.
How unreasonable.
I know, how unreasonable can you get? Well, when the current, and I know I don't want to get into a big, political thing today, because the situation is too upsetting. I do want to say, no matter what I've verbalized in the past, I am a loyal, patriotic American who cares deeply about what's happening to my home country. And before we get into our last couple questions,
I just want to say very quickly, and it concerns that a woman who has never spent a day outside of private school, private education, private college, from a billionaire family, who has never set a foot in public school, has never sent a kid to public school, is now the Secretary of Education.
Horrifying.
That
horrifying, and on every level.
I see coming there's someone with a hacksaw coming in going, I am going to cut off arms and legs here because I don't like this. That's all I see happening.
I know.
That's a travesty. Yes.
Distraction. A lot of this other stuff, I'm telling you, banning Muslims is a distraction. Let's build the wall a distraction. That's so we can get the Goldman Sachs guys in position and get ready to make the Bush-Cheney kleptocracy look like romper room.
Yeah, no kidding. And I know that you talked before about Dick Cheney and his involvement and corruption. And we've gotten into this and other shows. What do you think that? Do you think that John Podesta is going to be able to continue to agitate for disclosure in the midst of all of this
Oh
numbskull
no.
chaos?
Don Podesta's reputation is absolutely destroyed.
Yeah.
His reputation is ruined now. He has destroyed himself. Pizzagate has destroyed him, and what seems to be rightfully so. I hate to say it, but it looks like him and his brother have been up to no good and are bad touching kids. And I mean, let me say two things. Unfortunately, there is a ton of propaganda in these stories, meaning because we're talking about people who are on one political side of the aisle, the other side just wants to set them on fire and therefore makes up 99 things that are untrue for every one thing that's true about them. This was true during President Obama's presidency. This continues to be true now. So it's not that these people have done terrible things. They have. It just turns out that the right-wing political machine chooses to not focus on the truth and instead chooses to say, let's make up 99 things with that one thing that's true and then make this just look like something insane. So unfortunately, a ton of the conversation about what's happening at the deep core of this is actual, and it's not very accurate, but there's something wrong in Denmark, as the prince once said. And so there's definitely some awful things that, as an question, and I would there are people I would want to seriously sit down and talk to them and ask them about where they were on certain dates and who they were with, and provide me your phone and other records to show me where you were, because I would want to know. And John Podesta and his brother would be two of them. And so it's unfortunate that both sides of the political aisle, both parties, have been so badly contaminated by corporate corruption, because there were genuine efforts on both sides. There are genuine, heartfelt, patriotic Americans on both sides of both political aisles who want bona fide change that is good for everybody, that helps American jobs and our economy and stops, sifting it up to the top billionaire class. And they have all been circumvented on both sides by political carpetbaggers who have done a really, really good job of using the language of either side to get what they want. So one side throws red meat to get what they want. The other side throws red meat to get what they want, and they're all lying. But that doesn't mean that every Democrat and every Republican's a liar, right? This is the problem. This is the problem that we have. I know many, many good politicians. I'm going to call them that, politicians, men who have statesmen's positions, who are both Democrats and Republicans, who I respect. Some of them in my own state, some of them in other states of which I have personally interacted with. Okay, there are people who are trying to operate government in a sane, rational way in which it's supposed to function, which is so that everything runs smoothly, so that the economy runs smoothly, so that things get from place to place smoothly, so that the roads work, so that the power lines work, so that the poop goes one way and not the other way. I lived in Colorado Springs for a little while when the city down the road had a problem. The river came up and washed their whole sewage system right back into the river, and the poop went the wrong way. And it was not good. And so, government makes sure that stuff goes, that the poop goes the right way, that this goes the right way, that things don't burn the whole house down. Because if there's one thing we've learned, the people who businessmen cannot be trusted to navigate or manage themselves, because they will act like it's 1845. And anyone who thinks that 1845 was a time of fair and just business practices needs to read a history book, right? Because it was the most corrupt, the most corrupt business practices, because there was no regulation whatsoever. There was no management whatsoever. The
Yeah.
federal government had almost no jurisdiction to control what people were doing,
That's right.
and miners and ranchers and people could just absolutely murder people for their land and their
Yeah.
deeds and drop them and and just do the most horrible business practices for the sake of profit. So we know that if you just let business people do what they want, they like pirates.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
So
Absolutely.
there are wonderful, honest politicians on both sides who want to make government the fair thing that it's supposed to be, to say, no, no,
Mhm.
no, we just want you to be fair. We want our fair share of what we need of that. We want you to act fair to that person, to that party, and that party to act fair to that party. That's really what we're here to do, is to set minimum standards and make sure everyone, to be the referee, to make sure everyone's playing fair. That's what it's supposed to do. And when it functions, that's what it does. But corrupt money in politics has, screwed that over. So all I have to say about this whole process is everyone wants to burn it to the ground, and that's a mistake. It has to still be repaired. It still has to be
Mhm.
fixed.
Mhm.
And whether that can still be done from within these parties at this point, or whether there really has to be fundamental conversation about the creation of third parties, which there's very, very serious conversation about that right now, and by people who were working in the Bernie Sanders campaign
Yeah.
and bringing Bernie into the third party, and he seems ready to do it. To be honest with you, he
Well,
seems about fed up how he got treated in the primary to do it. So we'll see.
yeah. I
Anyway,
would
that's
have
my
to
rant.
interject that here in Canada, we have a really successful multiple party system. Three
Yep.
very solid parties. And from that span the spectrum of the fiscally
Prudent.
punitive and prudent Tories, as we say,
Yeah.
and to all
Oh,
the way to the Bernie Sanders like NDP party, and I would also have to say that the parliamentary system, I feel, is superior to the more recent version that the United States adopted, because we can, once a government stops, without getting into a heavy trip, once a government stops being functional, then a
yeah.
change happens. And
Absolutely. Set up a
unfortunately,
bicameral majority minority system, which has been so bipolar. It's
yeah,
just been
yeah,
so bipolar.
good word for that.
Having
Yeah,
a parliamentary coalition process, I think, is way more fair,
yeah.
where you have people elected from 3 to 9 different parties,
Mm-hmm.
and people
Yeah.
just have to say, okay, we have to work together now.
Yes.
It's not just about us and them, which, I'm just going to say this because it needs to be said. There are those people who want that division because they want civil war to happen.
Yeah.
I'm going to say it. Okay. There are people who want armed conflict of one side and the other in this country. They want us shooting at each other with bullets and bombs. They want open civil war. They want that.
Yeah.
Keep that in mind,
Yeah.
as the flames get, fanned, that there are people who want that to happen, which is why we should try very, very, very hard to make sure that we don't walk down a path of it's just us and them,
Yeah.
and we have to fight it out
Right.
once again, because it will just be an even more bloody bloodshed than the last Civil War. So we
Yeah.
really just don't need that at this point. But there are people who absolutely want to do that.
Yeah. Couldn't
That
agree.
is their stated goal.
Couldn't agree more, Randy. We have a couple of last
Yes.
questions here, and these come from one of our viewers, and they're both pretty good. Wes,
Yeah.
carry on.
So we have some viewers who are very ardent. Let me use that term. And
I got a few of those hands, yeah.
and they want to be heard, and they know that we can ask questions sometimes. Not that you're going to answer them, but we'll ask you, and we'll find
Do my
out.
best.
This particular viewer was interested in the Radiant Guardian program and wanted to know more about it, if possible. How much civilian, how much military, what's the chain of command? Can you speak about that?
Not really.
Okay.
I mean, there's not much. There's not much that I mean, I don't have a lot of restrictions on what I can or cannot say, but that definitely falls into a category of like classified information, because we're talking about like explaining the operational sort of procedures of a military operational system, which still has to deal with security concerns.
Understood.
And so, but what I can say is those are also numbers that I don't necessarily have at my fingertips.
Mhm.
I mean, that's something that maybe I would have to go asking for and looking up, that if I wanted like those kind of
Right.
figures, it's not something that would be at my fingertips, because it would just be that's a very specific kind of higher command level information that a certain number of generals or admirals might end up with a piece of paper on their list that lets them know that, but plenty of other officer levels that you're just not going to have handed to you someday a piece of paper that lets you know how big the fleet is. There's always been some mystery to those of us serving down the chain of command on how big the fleet actually is, how many ships are actually in the fleet, where they're all deployed, what they're doing. In fact, there was so much mystery when I was a pilot, as far as what we were doing. I mean, as far what we were doing was very basic. The larger ship would go from place to place, and then we would go out on patrols, and we would, do this patrol pattern, come back, and and wait so many hours and do it again, and then wait so many hours and then do it again, and then that was a day cycle. Three sort of three
forays.
Three patrols a day, which were about 3 to 4 hours of patrol, and that was essentially a day. So a day's work, and that was what we did. But beyond that, I have no idea what was really happening. I mean, we weren't allowed in the engineering section, we weren't allowed in the command section. So I don't know what happened in the tail end. Because I was never there's a door that I was never allowed to go past. I was in the command section one time when I was escorted up into a senior officer's office who wanted to have a brief conversation with me. And normally they'll come to you. It was one moment where I got escorted up to talk to him, got to walk up, the command section, it's shiny. But I mean, normally you never, I've never seen the bridge. I don't know what the bridge looks like. I have no idea. I don't know how big the bridge is. I don't know how many people are on the bridge. I don't know if they have a big window or a view screen. I've never been on the bridge. I have no idea. So I don't know I understand from conversation that they had a multiple power source propellant system. So they had multiple systems that could move the ship in case one or more failed. Beyond that, no idea. So we really often felt like we were being kept in a box, and some people, used to joke, some smart ass joked about, being Schrodinger's cat, and it's just like, am I alive or dead today? I don't know. I'm in a box. And, I'm in a box. I don't know. And so it was just, we don't know, what we were doing any given day because there's just no communication at that level. So I apologize for not even being able to touch that question other than going,
that's fine.
It's a detailed level of it that's above my grade and is just, yeah. I can say that the fleet itself is probably almost a 90% military organization. I mean, it has very little civilian personnel working in the organization. They would mostly be their diplomatic personnel are almost 100% military personnel. So it would be a very tiny percentage of civilian personnel operating within sort of that arm of the fleet. But beyond that, there's not much I can say.
Okay.
Well, thank you very much. You touched down on it, and I'm sure our viewer will appreciate that. Thank you for that.
Indeed. And one last question, Randy. There's been some rumors in the ufology community, I guess, that there has been fairly recently a rather significant explosion of a battle carrier on Mars. And whether or not this has happened, I don't know if you can confirm or deny, but is there anything you can update us with about what's actually going on right at the moment with the Mars Defense Force?
Well, let's see, what can I say about that? We know that the uprising is ongoing. We know that the larger apparatus of the MCC and the ICC operations on Mars have been disrupted. They are not functioning at 100%. They are functioning at below 50%. I couldn't say any specifically how below 50%, but we have on good authority and good intelligence that all factories, energy production, everything is at least below 50% operational capacity at this time, which lets us know that it's still in the middle of a lot of upheaval. We don't. There's no winners or losers still. There is division of territory that is not budging much at the moment. I would suggest in the maps that I've looked at, would suggest to me that the way in which they have divided up their territories, their claimed territories for this particular conflict, which will almost have to break down into, we can break them down into like fully protected fortresses, because these are not open air facilities. These are all facilities that are essentially concretized underground or within something, so they can all be sort of seen as individual fortresses which occupy a certain number of personnel, material, food, water, access to food, water, etc. We know that access to water is a big deal on Mars. We've learned that access to water is a huge big deal. There's not enough water to go around to everyone. They're not getting enough water, or I should say that the ICC's cost for pumping that water and what they're charging people for the water. Oh, you need water? That's fine. We'll pump it to you, but it's so operating in colonies is much the same that they have here by overcharging the colony companies for water and resources and everything else. So many of the colonies are experiencing heavy financial hardship already because of being, crushed upon by the ICC, which was causing management to have to step on labor much harder. And then labor finally said, no, we've had enough. And so as it happens, labor uprising, some management, of course, siding with labor, some management siding, with the top level, and then you just have absolute chaos at that point as it tries to sort itself out. And so as we have seen the territory that they've sort of been able to divide themselves into sort of fortress in territory. So they have limited access to food, water, supplies. They have limited supply chains. So this isn't going to last forever.
Yeah.
Right? And wars of attrition, are decided based on who runs out of food bullets first, but usually meals first. Yeah. So this is an ongoing conflict in which attrition will eventually decide how it's going to work out. But there's not much more we can say about that other than everything's still operating at below capacity, and we don't have any word on who's in charge.
Okay.
So that at this point, I would suggest that we still have tiny factionalized groups which through some sort of loose form of organization, like, all right, when the bombs go off at once, we'll all, hit the guys in the head with the pipes. And, so I think what became a loose sort of uprising of small groups is finding difficulty cohesion, but on both sides, I don't know that there's cohesion on the other side trying to sort of, put down that uprising, because it's not clear, as it always is in such conflicts, whether it's the right thing to just stomp down the uprising or whether it's the time to negotiate with labor. And so as many people on the other side are saying, okay, hey, maybe it's time to negotiate with labor. Isn't this how we do this? We kick them and kick them and kick them until they uprise, and then we negotiate. So let's negotiate. And some people are like, nah, stomp them in the ground. And it's like, they're coming up against the very real thing. Like, dude, we need these laborers. Like, we can't get the job done without labor. Even if we have some of these people we're basically treating like slaves, but if we don't have them, we can't make this money. And so maybe what has to happen is they have to really put more pressure up the chain on the ICC to be like, dude, you're breaking our backs, at this, $20 a gallon stuff, for water. I don't know what that's, I'm making that up. I have no idea, but it's out something high. And so maybe that has to happen, that the whole system of negotiation has to completely change before there will be some kind of balance brought to it. But I don't know. At this moment, it's just chaos.
Okay. Randy, are any of the indigenous beings that we've discussed at great length in other shows, are they involved in any of this conflict? Are they taking sides? The reptilian beings, or the insectoids, are they just hanging out in their underground pods and their lairs, or is this shall we say, a multi-racial, a multi-life form conflict going on right now?
That I'm going to have to say no comment to.
Okay, all right.
And we're getting to the point of winding down the show anyway, so.
Randy, I just want to say that here in Canada today, it's Family Day, and we want to thank you for being, part of our family, and we wish you just every wonderful happiness and all the wonderful things that are happening in your life right now. And we want to thank you once again for joining us, being so honest, being so candid, and like that. So thank you so much, Captain Randy Cramer, Captain K, and we will get together with you in the not too distant future for part 3 of our 3-part interview here on Contact TV. Thank you so much, Randy, and take good
Oh,
care.
my pleasure. It's President's Day up here, so we have taken Lincoln's birthday and Washington's birthday and turned them into one day for mattress sales. So if you want to get a 50% off sale on a mattress today somewhere in America, today's the day, man.
Today's your day.
President's Day mattress sale.
Well,
I got a great mattress. I don't need a mattress, but yeah, President's Day. It's a bank holiday. Otherwise, I'd be at the bank. But
Okay.
well, we know
taking
we'll
care of my
be in
bank.
touch soon.
We will, Randy. And thank you so much once again for joining us. It's always such a pleasure. We appreciate you so much, and take good care. And we'll be speaking to you again very soon.
Thank you.
My
Bye,
pleasure.
Roger.
Take care now.
Thank you. Bye-bye
Bye now.
now.
My pleasure. Good to talk with you as always.